Captain's Log, Stardate 73452.5. We have returned to Lone Star Station and have been made aware that Lieutenant Commander Christofferson has been transferred by Starfleet Command. It is good to have an old friend aboard the station, especially with the opportunity of him serving as my first officer, having gone so long without one. This episode of These Are the Voyages is dedicated to Constable Odo. The drop becomes the ocean. Hello and welcome back to another episode of These Are the Voyages. I'm the captain, I'm Captain Chase McKinney, and I have a first officer here with me.
Hi!
Hello there. Hello there. As you heard in our captain's log, we have Lieutenant Commander Eric Christofferson that is joining us here aboard the station. So we are so excited to have you aboard, Eric. You were here on the show not too long ago, and we got to catch up and talk Trek together.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I'm glad that you welcomed me back. It's good to be back on the station. And for all of you out there that listened to the podcast I was on last time, there's some audio issues with the last time. Don't blame Chase, blame me. But hopefully we've got that figured out. I've got this new shiny microphone that I can use, and hopefully everything sounds better this time around.
Yeah, it looks so fancy too. I mean, like looking at our little video conferencing thing that we're doing right now with our, putting things on screen right now. It's got like this sweet arm and pop filter and everything. Like you're like really moving on up, dude.
Well, it looks just like yours, except your camera is closer than mine is, so I can't see your boom arm and everything.
Okay. Well, anyways, before we really dive in and start talking Trek, what's new with you, man?
Not much. I've just been, semester ended. Normally I'm a professor. Semester ended, so I've got some time off here. Mm-hmm. Just went and saw the new Star Wars movie today. Didn't like it, but that's a thing for a different time to talk about.
Okay. Yeah, I saw it today also, and you're right. That's a conversation for a different day. I mostly liked it. I didn't hate it, but I mostly liked it. So we can have a conversation off the pod and talk about that, or maybe we can record something separate and we can put that on the Patreon account for our patrons to listen to. Talking about something non-Trek related, of course. So,
yeah, because we could go down a whole road there, and I've got a lot of things to say, but you can't really talk about it today because it just came out.
Right.
Talk about it. You got to give people time to see.
Right. Yeah. So, absolutely, I don't want to be that guy where, we spoil stuff and anything like that. So, yeah, I mean, good for me, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it for what it was, but anyways, we'll keep on moving. Apart from that, like you were saying, like the semester ended for you, and you're a professor teaching people math stuff. Very technical term, of course. And semester ended for me as well, and I didn't die, which is good. I was freaking out about statistics this semester, and I somehow managed to get by with an A, and I'm pretty happy about that.
Nice. I've taught statistics before.
Okay. Yeah, SPSS is your friend if you can learn how to use it.
I've just taught the basic, undergrad statistics course. Nothing upper level and fancy like that, so we don't really get into a whole lot of programming stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and apart from that, like beyond school, just been spending time with family, especially my mom. My mom's been in the hospital the last week, about a week at the time of this recording, and things aren't too good, but I'm also remaining hopeful and optimistic that things will turn around for her some way, somehow. And I think you've just recently traveled to see your mom and your brother and your family in general down in was it like South Central Texas or something?
Yeah, I just drove down to San Antonio yesterday from northern Missouri. It's about a 14-hour car trip. So that's always fun.
Yeah, I remember you were talking pre-show last time, like, man, I'm almost there. Oh crap, I'm in Texas. I still got like 7 hours left.
Yeah, you hit that Red River, you cross that Red River, and you're like, yes, I'm here. But then you realize, no, 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 you're not.
No, no, really, truly. Like, seriously, you are not there yet. So, anyway, so again, I'm happy to have you back, and that we're able to catch up and stuff. Since it's been about a month at the time of the recording since you were last on, and there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in the world of Trek for the most part. And just for those that have been listening since the beginning, you'll know that we started the TRTV news segments as we started out just doing it in the regular show, and then we've kind of morphed and made it its own weekly thing, and had to take off the last 2 weeks because of family issues on my end and taking care of mom. But those will be returning here next week. There's a lot of news that's kind of making the rounds in terms of show news, the comic, the upcoming Picard series. But rather than talk about that, there's one that we were going to cover, and I think I'd put it on all the socials like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook with Renee, who played Odo. And we could spend a lot of time talking about him, and I think we're going to. So this episode's probably going to have about a similar runtime as it normally is, maybe a little longer or a little shorter, just depending on how things go. But I'm probably going to butcher the name. I did study French in college, so looking at it, the way that it looks like it's pronounced would be René Auberjonois, but I know there's probably other folks that pronounce it differently.
I feel like every time I've seen him talk about it, he pronounces it Auberjois.
Okay.
So that's always the way I say it is Auberjois.
Okay.
But, it's French, so who the hell knows?
True story. But yeah, just the way it looks, that's kind of how it sounds to me, just based on how it looks. But regardless of how you pronounce it, Renee, fantastic actor. We know him primarily, at least the folks in Trek primarily know him as playing Constable or Security Chief Odo on Deep Space Nine, which is a role that he originated and served in for the duration of the show when it came on the air in 1993, if I'm not mistaken. And there are folks that know him from other shows, other characters that he's played, and just kind of want to take the time, want to give ourselves enough runway just to be able to talk about whatever we want to talk about today when it comes to Renee, like favorite moments, both in Trek or out of Trek, things just in general. So without putting you too much on the spot, Eric, anything that kind of stands out to you about this particular actor, whether it's in Trek or out of Trek?
Well, he's known as Odo, but you can also find him. He was on The Practice, and then he carried that role over to Boston Legal, and he was on Boston Legal for the entire runtime, along with William Shatner, right? William Shatner was the main character of Boston Legal.
Right.
So you had the two Trek actors, I don't want to say reunited, because they were never together on Star Trek, but
sure,
reunited in a certain sense.
Right. Yeah, I was reading about that because I never watched Boston Legal, but I knew that Shatner was on there, and it, truth be told, it wasn't until Renee's death that I really became aware of what was going on, or that I became more aware that he was on that particular show. In fact, one thing that kind of surprised me was, gosh, I want to say maybe 6 months ago. I feel like kind of an idiot for this, but 6 months ago is when I was looking through The Little Mermaid, because my daughter was watching it, and I was just looking up up stuff about it, and I'm like, holy cow, he was the chef in The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, he just does the ha ha ha.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's that. Yeah, like the quintessential stereotypical, French chef or whatever. So, anyway, but apart from that, you were talking last time that even though and today's show is about Star Trek Voyager, and we'll get to that here in a little while, that was your original kind of baptism of sorts into Trek to a certain extent, but that Deep Space Nine was your favorite show. So knowing that DS9 was your favorite show, are there any particular Odo moments that kind of stand out to you, like specifically at all, or anything like that?
I know that it's maybe not a standout episode, but after the pilot episode, and I know we mentioned this, and this is kind of like the accepted fact, is that season 1 of Deep Space Nine is pretty not good, right?
It's horrible. It's almost unwatchable.
It's not good. Like, I'll say that. Season 1 is not good. But I feel like the pilot episode is very good. And then there's the second episode right after that, I feel like, is also a pretty decent episode. And that's an Odo-centric episode. So you have the pilot episode, and then the next episode after that is an Odo-centric episode. Mm-hmm. And it's called A Man Apart. And it's kind of sets up this whole solids versus changelings before we even really know that that's what Deep Space Nine is going to be about. Right? A group of people become suspicious of Odo because he's not like them and he's a changeling. And that's the very first episode after the pilot episode. So you already get this idea that they know they have this good character and they have this good actor there to use.
Right.
And I like the fact, I think one of your guests, when you talked about Deep Space Nine, she also mentioned the fact that she really liked the character Odo. I think it was her favorite character because he's not your genius level character like Spock or Data. Right. And I think that's a pretty good representation of this Odo character, is that he is kind of just like us in a certain sense. And he's definitely shown to be fallible. And I think that's one thing that Deep Space Nine does really well as a show, where I think some of the other shows kind of portray your Starfleet characters. And I know Odo's not a Starfleet character, but it kind of portrays all of your characters as not infallible, right?
Right.
But I feel like Deep Space Nine shows your characters and really goes out of your way to highlight their flaws. And Odo's flaws are highlighted throughout the entire show.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a couple of good episodes. I'm looking up here. I just want to get the seasons right. I know the episodes, I just want to get the seasons right. There's an episode in season 2. It's called Necessary Evil. This is a flashback episode. There's a couple of these good flashback episodes with Odo where you go back to his time when Deep Space Nine is Terok Nor under the Cardassians, right, and he's in charge of security. So there's this one called Necessary Evil, where this is the one where he gets appointed as the constable, right? And it's a good Kira-centric episode, like the two, like Odo and Kira playing off of each other, even all the way back in season 2. It's just a fantastic episode. And then the other episode, it's a good flashback episode. It's in season 5. It's called Things Past, where you go back and we see, this is where you really highlight the flaw of this Odo character, where several Bajorans are killed because he finds evidence that they're guilty of committing a crime, but then you find out that they really weren't guilty. And so I think it's really interesting that you see this character and you can relate to him because he is flawed just like all the rest of us, whereas a lot of Star Trek characters are portrayed as being infallible.
Right. And I think that was like kind of the point to a certain extent when it came to Deep Space Nine, was that there was more of these flaws that were evident with the characters. I think that was part of what the creative team was specifically doing with that show. So I can agree with that. And you're talking about some of these episodes that kind of highlight these moments with Odo. I don't know if the episodes I'm going to mention, and I'm probably not going to remember all their names off the top of my head because I'm not as familiar with Deep Space Nine or even Voyager, so just putting that disclaimer out there. But The Ascent is one of my favorite Odo episodes. It's where him and Quark crash with a runabout, and they have to kind of get up a mountain to with a transmitter.
Odo can't shapeshift, right?
Right.
Yeah. I know that episode.
Then there's another one. It's more of a Jadzia episode, but it's when she has to confront or go through with seeing her past selves, and each of the main cast kind of take on or represent an old personality of Jadzia's, of the Dax symbiote, I should say.
Yeah, and he takes on Curzon Dax.
Yes. So I really liked that one, mainly because it gave Renee like a little bit of room to breathe beyond just the shape-shifting character. We got to see his acting chops just go a little bit further. At least that was my experience of it. And I mean, there are a lot of good Odo episodes. There's just a lot of good episodes in Deep Space Nine, period. I really enjoyed, and I said it last time, but Far Beyond the Stars, I think that's a popular episode with any Deep Space Nine fan to a certain extent. I know not everyone's crazy about it, but I really liked his portrayal of the manager, the magazine editor, thank you, in how that was. So again, getting him out of the changeling role and just getting him to kind of like flex his acting chops.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that totally. I think he's a fantastic actor, and just to get to see him break out of that range, it's really nice to watch.
Right. Now, since we're talking
and I know I was watching some special features. This was like 10 years ago, and this sticks out to me. It was an interview with Ira Stephen Bear, who was the showrunner for Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. And he said conceptually when they were creating Deep Space Nine, they were looking for this constable character to be in the mold of Clint Eastwood type. And the studio was really pushing them to hire Renee. And Ira Stephen Bear was just like, I can't see it. I can't see him as this Clint Eastwood gruff sheriff western type. And I feel like he kind of nailed that.
I would agree. And
he does that gruff so well.
Yeah, and you see it like just get that much better as the seasons go on. But there's still that hint of like that teddy bear that kind of comes out at just the right time to where he's not just always this gruff, like cold jerk that you kind of maybe think he is in the first season.
Oh yeah, there's lots of good moments where he becomes emotionally vulnerable. There's the episode, I believe it's in season 1, where he and Lwaxana Troi get stuck in an elevator or a turbo lift.
Right, and I think Lisa and I were talking about that too. That was like I think that was one of her favorite moments, or something like that. It was just a memorable moment, period, where there's this vulnerability that's going on between the two characters that you really don't ever see when it comes to Lwaxana. I mean, you get like maybe 1 or 2 moments in Next Gen, but that was just a really telling point in her character development when they were trapped together and Odo had to go into his liquid form, otherwise bad things would have happened to him.
Yeah, and I feel like Odo and Lwaxana really develop a good bond over the course of the show. You know, she doesn't
Yes.
come back as much in Deep Space Nine as she did in The Next Generation, but when she comes back, I feel like there's some really good moments.
Yes. Yes.
Another one with her that comes to mind is she comes back in an episode where she is pregnant with I can't tell you the race because there's too many races to remember, but it's basically a race of beings that separate boys and girls from each other, and they don't even let the other one gender know about the other until they're like 16 or something.
Right.
And so Lwaxana is pregnant with this child from somebody from this race, and she doesn't want to like give. She knows she's having a son, and she doesn't want to give it up. So Odo comes in there and says, to help you save your son, by law of this species, the child belongs to the mother's husband. So he gets up there and pretends to like proclaim his real feelings for Lwaxana, and the whole time you're wondering, well, is he just acting or does he really have these true feelings for her? And it's a great moment for the Odo character and the actor Renee to really shine.
Absolutely. And you know, we're kind of talking about like the romantic part like right now. This is kind of a spoiler for anyone that's never seen Deep Space Nine, but there's some tension and some development that happens between the character of Odo and Kira, Major Kira. Any thoughts on that and just the choices that they made with that? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Or were you just kind of indifferent about that relationship?
Well, I liked it early on, especially when you find out that the only reason Odo is staying behind is because of Kira. There's a moment where we learn that he would have went, and once he learns about the Great Link and who his people are, where we learn that he would have returned to the Great Link had it not been for Kira, and she's the reason that he's staying behind. Mm-hmm. Now, their actual courtship, I could have taken it or leaving it. I didn't do a whole lot for me. It didn't take away from anything for me. But I certainly love the moment at the end in the finale, right? I said this on the last podcast we were on, that the series finale of Deep Space Nine, it's called What You Leave Behind, is my favorite episode of Star Trek, period. I think it's just a damn near perfect episode. And the goodbye that they have between each other is really, really nice. I like that, where Odo returns to the Great Link because he's going to heal them and save them from the disease that's spreading. And he tells Kira, I'm not coming back. And then he morphs into a tuxedo. And it's just a really nice moment.
Yeah. The drop becomes the ocean at that point.
Yeah.
And when it comes to What You Leave Behind, great finale. Love the finale. And I still felt a little bit of tension. I don't know if I really wanted it to be different, or if I still want it to be different, but just the way that things end with Quark and Odo at the end, I was hoping for a little bit, maybe something different. I don't know. I feel like you mentioned The Ascent, the episode The Ascent. Yes.
And that's like Quark and Odo really have to work together. And you definitely see in that What You Leave Behind that they definitely have a respect for each other.
They do.
And I like it.
Yeah, they definitely do. It's, I don't know, you just go 7 years with the characters, and I don't know, I just thought there would have been a little bit something different. I mean, it was more of just like a gruff, like, ugh, kind of like he always does. But I don't know. I don't even know if I'm making sense.
Well, I think I know what you're saying, and this just reminds me of a Battlestar Galactica episode. And we could talk about this because Battlestar Galactica was created by Ronald D. Moore, who was originally got his start on Star Trek, the writer. There's an episode toward the end of Battlestar Galactica where the Doctor on that show, Doc Cottle, is like a gruff Odo type character who's always grumbling and has no patience for people. And at the end, the president says to him, "You've always been so kind and so warming to me, and you've been a true like good friend this whole time." And he's left kind of speechless. And she's like, "No, don't ruin the moment. Just light a cigarette, grumble under your breath, and walk away."
Oh lordy.
And I feel like that's the way Quark and Odo's relationship needed to end, right? Just a gruff, don't ruin it. Just leave it there and walk away from each other.
Gotcha. So, just taking a quick pause from what we're talking about right now, I wanted to read at least one comment that was posted on the Facebook group. I was asking the folks on the group. So if you're not in the group and you're listening, make sure you head over to Facebook and join it. Just look for These Are the Voyages. If you find the page, then you found the group. You just hit the join the group button, and boom, there you are. We asked this question, or we posed this and said that we're working on an episode concerning Renee and talking about like favorite moments or just something in general about him. And Amanda Ryan, shout out to you, Amanda, just left this comment saying, it's weird, but what I actually know him best from is the narrator of the Pendergast series by Preston and Child. The man had an amazing voice. So, have you ever seen Pendergast?
No, I've never even heard of this. I'm not sure what it is.
Neither am I, but that's okay. But he does have a prolific voice acting career in its own right. So.
No, I know that he's done some voice work. Correct me if I'm wrong. This could be throwing this out there. Now that you just mentioned voice work, it just came back to me. Do you ever remember watching a show from like the early 90s called Pirates of Dark Water?
It sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, I'm fairly certain Rene Auberjonois or Auberjonois, whatever.
Okay.
We'll settle on something. I'm pretty sure he was one of the main voices on that show, now that it just came to me when she mentioned voice work.
Okay.
And I remember liking that show. I mean, I had no idea who he was at the time, but I'm pretty sure he was on that show.
So just to name off some of his voice performances, both in film and television. We talked about this just not too long ago. The Little Mermaid, he was the chef. He was also in the follow-up, direct to video Little Mermaid 2, but he was also in An American Tale. He was in Joseph, King of Dreams.
Wait, he was in American Tale with Fievel?
So this was in 2000. So An American Tale, The Treasure of Manhattan Island. So it had to have been probably the second or third one, I think.
Okay. I remember, really liking the Fievel.
Yeah.
American Tale.
He was in Tarzan and Jane, which was probably another direct-to-video kind of thing. Planes, Fire and Rescue, which was a Disney movie, I think, like a Disney Junior type movie that might have come out. But apart from that, the Smurfs, he was in Snorks, DuckTales, Superman, Batman, the animated series, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon show, he was in the TV show Jumanji, Extreme Ghostbusters. There was, apparently.
I had no idea.
Extreme Ghostbusters, Men in Black, the TV show, The Wild Thornberrys, Shaolin Showdown, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, I remember he was in one episode of that.
Yeah. Duck Dodgers, Archer, Young Justice, Ben 10, Omniverse, Avengers Assemble. They're more. I've skipped through these, but he's had a very prolific career, both in front of the camera, behind the camera, in terms of like regular acting and voice acting. I mean, they're both acting in their own right. They're both to be respected, but I mean, this guy's got some major talent. And then apart from just that, I mean, there's also the voice roles that he's done when it comes to like video games as well. So, I mean, certainly he reprised his role as Odo on Star Trek Online, but he was also in the different Uncharted video games. I think Uncharted 2 and 3, for anyone that plays that on PlayStation. I love the Uncharted series. If you've never played it and you have a PlayStation, you're missing out. You need to get that game and play it.
Isn't that like kind of like an Indiana Jones type game?
You're darn right it is.
I don't play video games ever, so I don't know.
Yeah, Uncharted is an amazing series, and like I've wasted a lot of time on that game, but it's a fantastic story. In fact, I'll just say this: Uncharted 2 is my favorite of the Uncharted series, followed in second place by Uncharted 4. So, anyway, that's a different rabbit trail altogether. But this guy, crazy talented. You've probably, if you haven't seen him, if this is your first time with anything Star Trek, you've probably heard him elsewhere beyond Star Trek, either in a cartoon or a video game. So that was a major rabbit trail, but I'm okay with it.
No, it's good. You're just celebrating his life and his work and acknowledging all the good things that he's done.
Right, and for any of the listeners that are going to be a little older than Eric and I, and Eric, I've seen it. I've seen bits and pieces. I wasn't like really into the show too much, but he was also in the show MASH. Did you ever watch MASH by chance?
I've seen a couple episodes of MASH. I'm actually a bigger fan of MASH the movie than MASH the TV. I know that's like sacrilege, but MASH the movie is pretty fantastic.
Okay.
You know, Robert Altman directed it, and it's got Donald Sutherland as Hawkeye. Okay. It's a different tone. It's a much more like black comedy, the movie. But okay. I've only seen a handful of episodes of MASH, the TV show. I had no idea that Renee was there.
Yeah, he was Father Mulcahy in MASH, so back in the 1970s. So this guy's been doing this thing for quite a while. So anyway, I know that there are other folks on the group that have met him, that have interacted with him.
Did you ever meet him?
No, I never got the chance to. And here's the thing that sucks too is, and I might have mentioned this before, but Aaron Eisenberg and Renee are the two. Apart from like, you know, Terry Farrell and Avery Brooks and like the other cast members, I really wanted to meet Aaron Eisenberg and Renee, and they're no longer with us. And it seems like 2019, as we kind of start to wrap this year up, you know, that we've lost some heavy hitters when it comes to Star Trek. We got, who was it? We got Nog, of course, Aaron Eisenberg, certainly Renee Auberjonois with Odo and Colonel West. Apart from Odo, he was also Colonel West in the Undiscovered Country.
He was also on one episode of Enterprise.
Yes.
Late in season 1, he has a guest spot on Enterprise.
Yes. And then we lost Dorothy DC Fontana not too long ago as well, and there's one other I'm forgetting, but he played Charlie X, I believe, in the original series.
Yeah, and we also lost another guest actor. Can't remember his name, but he was in an episode of the original series, just one episode. I think the episode called Miri from season 1 or season 2, where he's one of the main guest actors in there. I forget that actor's name. Okay. But
this has been a tough year for the Trek fandom just in general. So we could let's just do this. So, knowing that we've lost some of these favorite people, we could, or not these favorite, these people in general, whether they are favorites or not, just these Trek alums, these Trek creators. Is there anything that kind of maybe stands out to you about Aaron or DC, or we've been talking about Renee, but also Renee, that you might want to highlight at this point in the show?
Well, with DC Fontana, like, she had to go by the name DC, right?
Right.
They weren't allowed to use her real name, Dorothy, because Dorothy's a woman, right? And DC, you have no idea who that is.
Right.
And back in the 60s, the studio wouldn't accept women working on being head writers for a major TV show like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I look at how far we've come since then. And there's a great Deep Space Nine episode, you even mentioned it earlier, Far Beyond the Stars.
Right.
Which we highlighted Odo. Well, in that episode, the Kira alter ego, she plays a female science fiction writer who has to go by her initials, and that's in there because that's what DC Fontana had to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I had tried highlighting in a recent TRTV News episode was the fact, when I was talking about DC Fontana, is the fact that I think it was Gene Roddenberry's idea to say, hey, why don't you go by your initials, because the producers are kind of sexist.
Well, Gene Roddenberry told her that. I wasn't aware of that.
That's, just kind of reading around and kind of gathering as much information as I could regarding that. That seems to be the general consensus of how that kind of came about. And the fact that she became as well respected as she did, and that she rose in her prominence and her leadership and in her influence, is just absolutely amazing. And of course she penned or co-wrote the pilot for Star Trek: The Next Generation, of course. Yeah,
I was just going to mention that she actually wrote Encounter at Farpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Technically, she co-wrote it because Gene Roddenberry stepped in at the last moment and told a lie that basically the studio said that he had to write the episode, which was totally not true. So that's why you kind of get this weird pilot episode of The Next Generation that you can tell it wasn't written together. There's like two really distinct pieces, like The Mystery of Farpoint Station, which is what DC Fontana wrote, and then the whole Q part, which is what Gene Roddenberry wrote.
Yeah.
And it really does. You can tell that those two storylines were not written together. I can tell.
Now that you pointed out, I can kind of see what you mean. Yeah, I can see that. And I would have honestly, had you not said that, and if I would have known that they were put in like two spots like that, I would have thought that DC probably would have written the Q stuff, and that Roddenberry would have written the space station stuff for whatever reason.
Yeah, the other way around.
Yeah, totally the other way around. So, anyway, so I guess those are just some moments that we can kind of hang out with and just, enjoy and pay homage to all those actors, especially Renee, as we've spent a good chunk of time. We spent a good 40 minutes of this show already just talking about him specifically and what he's done for the fandom, for the franchise in general. So any parting thoughts or ideas as it relates to Renee before we kind of segue into the meat of this episode?
No, but the one other person there that we didn't give enough talk to was Aaron Eisenberg, who played Nog. That's what he's most familiar with. But he also played another role in Star Trek. I believe it's the only other Star Trek role he played. It was the primary guest spot on an episode of Star Trek Voyager. And I know that's what we're planning on talking about on this podcast.
Yes.
So I'll wait and I'll bring it up then. But it's definitely a big Aaron Eisenberg moment in Star Trek Voyager.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was one of the Kazon, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the earlier episodes of Star Trek Voyager, and Kazon being the
I've got a lot to say about the Kazon.
All right, I'm looking forward to hearing about it. So, with the Kazon, the Okampas, all that stuff, well, we're going to get into that. And certainly talking about him, since that stuff was more or less going on at the same time, like bouncing from one set to the next, as we continue to boldly go and make it so together. So, so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's kind of segue into talking about this journey that the crew of the USS Voyager made over the course of 7 years. Now, before we get into this, for those of you that are listening, what we're kind of doing, just to kind of give you a little sampling of stuff, is we're more or less looking at the main shows from like a 50,000 foot view, and we might kind of come in here and there and go down to like a 30,000 or a 10,000 foot view, but eventually we are going to go into more like ship design and like specific characters and comparing characters in future episodes. So this is kind of like an orientation thing at first, not to take you out of the show too much, but I know some of you might have some questions of like where's the show going. So that's kind of the method to the madness at this point in the game until Eric and I maybe talk some more, and especially hearing from you guys and what you guys are wanting to hear more from. So that being said, last time Eric was on, and like I said at the beginning of the show, this was a show that you had watched on the regular from 95 to 2001 when it was on the air, leading right up to our show that we watched together, which was 24. So we've heard some of that you were dedicated to watching it, and that's what you wanted for your birthday at one point, was just to watch Voyager, I think. So with that, let's just talk Voyager. Now, there was originally a different captain in the center chair on this show, and this particular captain, I think they were just removed at the very last second. I think the original pilot, or the pilot, had started to be filmed, and then they were let go, and then Kate had to come in and just take over.
Yeah, the original actor, Jean-Pierre Bujold, another French person, and I believe the name was different. It was Janeway, but it wasn't Catherine Janeway. It was something else.
Right.
I mean, I could be mistaken about that. But yeah, they actually filmed the entire pilot episode, I'm fairly certain. And if I've seen on YouTube, people have done side-by-side shots, right, where you can see the scene with the original actor and then with Kate Mulgrew, and they're very similar. There's a little bit of difference. There's even a few scenes that are in the final pilot episode that have the original actor in it, when they're like just showing their hands and they're looking at some screens and things like that. So it's interesting. You can go back and you can look these things up on YouTube, and you can find where there's actually a different actor, not Kate Mulgrew.
Right. I'm trying to find and confirm the name. So anyone that's listening, you're probably screaming at us right now. Like, no, I know what it is. You don't just hear me.
Yeah. Jean-Pierre Bujold was the actress, and I'm fairly certain it was not Catherine Janeway, but it was something else Janeway.
Right. So Kate Mulgrew, being of Irish descent, I'm pretty sure, part of what she wanted was to change the name to reflect more of her own Irish heritage. So that's where the genesis of, or I'm sorry, not even genesis, but just the impetus for changing the name came from, was wanting a piece of herself in there and reflecting her heritage. So that's where the whole Captain Catherine Janeway come from. Not just because it was Kate's name, but because of that.
Yeah, I just found it. Nicole Janeway.
Nicole, okay. That would have been weird.
Yeah, I think Catherine Janeway just sounds right.
It rolls.
But, I mean,
It just flows.
We're coming
so
at
much
that
easier.
with, almost 25 years of being Catherine Janeway.
True story. Yeah. I don't know. I definitely like Catherine way more than Nicole. I mean, Nicole Janeway just sounds weird. And if there is a Nicole Janeway listening to this podcast, I'm sorry. No malice or anything towards your name. It's just weird. You're used to it for 25 years, like you've been saying, of just hearing, Captain Catherine Janeway of the USS Voyager on every single episode.
Yeah, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be totally wrong about this, but Picard's name wasn't originally Jean-Luc Picard. It was something different in the original script.
I do think it was always Jean-Luc Picard, if I'm not mistaken. And once, I think Patrick Stewart was like one of the last choices for that role of the captain on Next Gen. And they had seriously thought about changing the name, but then they're like, whatever.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I had heard that at some point.
So, something that's interesting about this show that is very Star Trek is learning to work together through differences. I think that's like one of the primary ingredients, it would seem, with most Trek shows, especially when it comes to true 90s Trek. So, like, when I say true 90s Trek, I'm talking specifically Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Because, yeah, Next Gen was mostly in the 90s, but it originated in the 80s, and we had Worf, who was the outsider. We always seem to have an outsider character in Star Trek shows. But really focusing on our differences specifically and how do we work together with how we had Starfleet and the Bajoran militia in Deep Space Nine, and now we have on Star Trek Voyager, we have Starfleet and the Maquis having to work together.
Right, and the Maquis storyline, it plays a big role in Season 1 and then into Season 2, but then they kind of drop it, and it becomes almost not important. It pops up in a few episodes here and there, but it really kind of just gets almost dropped.
They don't retcon it by any means, but yeah, they don't prioritize it as much. And the thing that I think is really neat is you see the struggle. Like, they're on the struggle bus they're on the struggle bus for 70 years, more or less. But, I mean, they're really on the struggle bus when it comes to, okay, like, half the ship or a good chunk of the ship's crew is gone. We have these terrorists, these people like that are against our values, but we're stuck together. How do we work together? And then, like, having to bring people together.
Yeah, and I think that that's really addressed in the first 2 episodes. So the pilot episode, at the very end, she names Chakotay her first officer, right? Because he has Starfleet experience. He was in Starfleet before he left to join the Maquis.
Right.
And then at the very end, the very last thing she says is, we're going to be one crew, an integrated crew. We're going to be a Starfleet crew. And that's essentially the very last line. I'm pretty sure she says, like, set course for home is the last line. But yeah, that plays an important role there at the end of that first episode. And then in the second episode, there's a A line, which is not that interesting. The A story in the second episode is not that interesting. The B story is really the interesting story in that second episode, which is about how are these Maquis crewmen going to fit in to this command structure, right? One of the keys is B'Elanna Torres, right? Chakotay says, hey, the chief engineer died in the caretaker incident. I want B'Elanna Torres to be the chief engineer of this ship. I think she's the most qualified. And Janeway says, that angry Klingon woman? No way. I'm going to let my man Carrie be the chief engineer. And Chakotay is really adamant. No, this can't be.
Right.
And he pushes back against Janeway. And I think you get to see Chakotay be a better character here than he ever is later on in the show, when he's really pushing back and he's fighting for his Maquis crew members. And he says at one point, he says, I have no interest in being your token Maquis officer on board this ship. Right? You have to let some of my other Maquis people be officers on this ship. And eventually then B'Elanna Torres proves her worth, and the B story gets joined with the A storyline in that episode.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just really like the way Chakotay stands up to her there at the end and says, I have no interest in being your token Maquis officer here. Like, if we really want to be an integrated crew, then you have to be open to letting my people be important members of this crew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's also the episode where we meet Seska. We can talk about Seska.
We have to.
Yeah, you cannot talk about Star Trek Voyager without talking about Seska.
All right. We'll get to her in a minute. So while we're...
I would argue outside of the main cast, she's the most important character, outside of all the principals.
Okay. And her role was for a few, like about 2-ish seasons, I think.
Yeah, she's there for the first 2 seasons, yeah.
And then she kind of comes back there for a second.
Like a holodeck incident, and then like a time warp incident.
Right. Let's do the time warp again. I'll put that in post or something. I don't know. So in this, like the first episode, we are introduced to the issue of what their new mission's going to be. We're also introduced to the Delta Quadrant, like, properly. So the main shows up to this point have primarily focused on the Alpha Quadrant and some of the Beta Quadrant.
Well, if you actually look at the Star Trek maps, like they made like official Star Trek maps,
yeah.
Like Earth is right on the dividing line between the Alpha Quadrant and the Beta Quadrant. And like the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Empire are in the Alpha Quadrant, but like Deep Space Nine and the Cardassia, those are in the Beta Quadrant, according to the official Star Trek maps.
Right, and so yeah, we've been exposed more to Alpha and Beta quadrants, and Deep Space Nine really started to focus more on Gamma Quadrant, and then of course with Voyager, spoilers guys, being stranded in the Delta Quadrant, we're getting this whole new world that we're being exposed to, like with all the alien races and the planets. And the crew having to navigate and get back home via the Delta Quadrant. So, I think probably the main, more popular exposure to the Delta Quadrant came with the Borg. So, around, I think it was like middle to end of season 2 of Next Gen was Q Who, if I'm not mistaken, whenever it was introduced. And then, of course, properly end of season 3 and into season 4 of the Next Gen series. So we got like a little sampling, but now we're in it like for the main course when it comes to Star Trek Voyager.
Yep, we go to the Delta Quadrant, and I think the idea behind that is, we can't keep introducing new races in the Alpha Quadrant and the Beta Quadrant, right? We've been exploring here for so long. We need somewhere new to explore, and we need to introduce new alien species. We can't keep doing Klingons and Romulans and Cardassians, right? We need new species, and by transporting your ship to the other side of the galaxy, you can introduce all of these new species, and you can create fresh and new storylines.
Yes, absolutely. So, we, as I was saying, like, they're now stranded in the Delta Quadrant, so it gives the writers plenty of room to explore and create and do creative things that Star Trek hadn't seen up to this point to a certain extent. And as a result of that, the first Delta Quadrant type aliens that we're meeting are going to be Kes and Neelix, who become principal members of the crew. I believe Neelix becomes the ambassador / cook of the ship, and he came up with like different titles throughout the show. I remember ambassador at one point, but yes, morale, cook, and whatever else he came up with depending on the episode. And then Kes, of course, becomes an apprentice of the EMH doctor, and we'll talk about the doctor and the EMH, or the doctor and Kes here a little bit later on. But of course, like you were saying, there's Seska. So I'm going to let you quarterback this one and talk about Seska as much as you want to.
Okay, so we're not going in the order I was looking at, but okay. So Seska, she gets.
Well, you know what? We can back up. We can go wherever you want.
No. You cheat up Seska here. Let's talk about Seska. Martha Hackett is the actress, and she'd been on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. She did a guest spot as a Romulan in the episode The Search, which is a really good, really important Deep Space Nine episode. So she shows up in episode 2 of season 1 as Seska, the love interest of Chakotay. They had a relationship. I don't know if they are still in a relationship at this point, but they had been in a relationship previous.
Right.
And Seska is she's a Bajoran, right?
Yes.
Bajoran.
Yes.
You couldn't see me do air quotes, but I said she's a Bajoran with air quotes. And she's just an engineer on the ship, right? She's part of the engineering team. And eventually we learn that Seska is not really a Bajoran, but she's a Cardassian. And she was surgically altered to appear Bajoran to infiltrate the Maquis, right? And
oh my gosh.
Oh my god, I know, major spoilers. This is big spoilers. But like I said, this is 25 years ago, and I feel like the statute of limitations on spoilers has expired.
And you know about statute of limitations. You know about I'm just saying, with your mom being an attorney and everything.
Oh, okay. I get it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so turns out Seska is really a Cardassian. She's sent to spy on the Maquis. And what she does is she makes a pact with the Kazon, right, to try and steal technology from Voyager, because in the pilot episode we see that Captain Janeway is reluctant to give technology to the Kazon because the Kazon they really don't get along with themselves or other races, and so giving the Kazon any type of technology, Janeway feels is a real shift in the balance of power, which is why she has to destroy the caretaker array, which leaves them stranded there. So Seska makes a deal with one of the Mages. That's like the title of one of the leaders of the Kazon sects. And she steals technology from Voyager to give to the Kazon. And eventually she's found out, and she ends up leaving Voyager to openly join the Kazon and openly become Cardassian again. And she becomes the primary antagonist for the first 2 seasons of the show. And say what you will about the Kazon, you cannot talk about Star Trek Voyager without talking about the Kazon, right? They are the primary antagonists for the first 2 seasons. Like, I know lots of people don't like them, right? Lots of people don't like them. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I don't think they're as terrible as everyone else thinks they are. But the simple fact is that you cannot talk about Voyager without talking about the Kazon.
True. And, just like any apart from Kazon and stuff, I don't think things are as bad, period, as people make them out to be, regardless of the fandom. Whether that's Star Trek, like what we're talking about, or Star Wars, or Doctor Who, or Battlestar, or Stargate SG-1, or anything like that. People like what they like, and that's cool. Like you were talking about the Kazon, I never really saw an issue with the Kazon. They were just annoying to me, like, to a certain extent, and I definitely was getting, like, the intimidation vibes and all the stuff, as we were going episode by episode with them, thinking, oh crap, the Kazon are about to show up and stuff's about to hit the fan. So I thought it was good for the time that they were on the show, and my personal opinion is that if they would have stayed on longer than like a season 3 or 4 type of thing, I really do feel like the adversarial stuff with them would have grown stale. And
no, I agree. The show outgrew the Kazon and had to move past them. They couldn't continue to be a recurring antagonist the same way that the Klingons and the Romulans were recurring antagonists. The show had to move past them.
And even logistically speaking, I'm not talking from a writing standpoint. I'm just talking like within the universe of Star Trek. Where they end up is on like the far side, or what we believe to be the far side of the Delta Quadrant. So with them constantly moving forward, they're going to get farther and farther away from the Kazon population. At least that's my headcanon. So
so they're moving out of Kazon territory.
Yeah.
So like they have to leave them behind.
Yeah, they have to leave. It wouldn't make sense for them to consistently be popping up. They had to go away. Period.
Right, that's true. And I think that that's true of all the alien races that Voyager encountered in the Delta Quadrant. As you continue this path, moving through the Delta Quadrant back toward Federation space, you're going to approach a species territory, and then you're going to move past them. And at a certain point, you have to leave that race behind.
Right. And you definitely see that with original Star Trek and the Next Generation, because they're just zipping around all over wherever they're at, and you might see them again just because you're zipping around, and the story might necessitate something like that. And then of course with Deep Space Nine, it's like the problems are coming to us, but we might go to the problem now that we have the Defiant and we're going through the wormhole. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk in circles about this, but yes, absolutely, there has to be that growth. There has to be that moving away, especially moving the narrative along. And I think and if I'm jumping around, just put a leash on me or something, dude. But whenever we're talking about later seasons of Voyager, when species 8472 and the Borg are involved, that you kind of have to expect that they can show up at any time, like with these transwarp corridors and stuff like that they're using to get around the galaxy. So from a story standpoint, it makes sense that the Borg can pop up at any time, anywhere, for the most part.
I agree with that, and we're going to talk about the Borg a lot, right? But I feel like I don't want to say anything about the Borg just quite yet until we've actually gotten to that point.
Sure.
Because I've got a lot to say about the Borg.
Okay.
But I think your point is definitely valid.
So with that, we've kind of jumped around, and that's partly my fault. I'm okay with that. So why don't you kind of steer us or give the order of where we're going next and what you want to talk about and focus on for this part of the show.
Okay, well, let's talk about Season 1. Start from the beginning, which we've kind of already said a few things about some of these episodes in here that I think are important. But let's start right at the beginning. And this is kind of apropos, I guess, because today is the day that the final Star Wars movie came out. We're recording this the day that Rise of Skywalker came out. And if you go to the pilot episode of Voyager, like, you can turn this on as you're listening to this or right after you listen to this and just play the very beginning of the pilot episode. Is that not a Star Wars opening?
Pretty much.
I mean, how does Star Wars start? It starts with this screen crawl where these words move up across the screen, setting up the situation. When the words are gone, ships fly from across the screen, and most of the time they start shooting back and forth at each other. And that is literally how Star Trek Voyager starts. You have this screen crawl that sets up the Maquis storyline. And it says Federation colonists along the Cardassian border, unhappy with the treaty, they banded together to fight the Cardassians. I know I screwed up that wording, and forgive me. But Never. We have this screen crawl just explaining the situation. When the screen crawl finishes, two ships fly from across the screen and start shooting back and forth at each other. And it is like, that's Star Wars right there. That's how Star Wars starts.
Right.
And so I just think that's kind of interesting that Star Trek chose to do that. Chose to just use this technique that is so blatantly Star Wars to open this show. This show that they were planning on being their new flagship show, right? Because The Next Generation had just ended, and Deep Space Nine was never going to be the flagship show for Star Trek.
Which is kind of disappointing, since DS9 came before Voyager. You would think that there had been more confidence with the show having been on the air for a year and a half to 2 years prior to Voyager dropping, especially with Voyager being, the premier show, the flagship show of the new United Paramount Network, UPN for short.
Yeah, that was UPN. It just started, and they were using Voyager as the show to be their highlight.
Yeah. David Fogel would certainly appreciate the whole opening crawl thing there on that pilot episode of Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah, and then it's kind of accepted as a fact in the Star. And I think I even said this earlier on this episode that the first season or two of Star Trek shows are not very good.
Right.
I think you go to the first season of The Next Generation, and there's some good episodes in there. Don't get me wrong. There's some hidden gems that you can find in there, but there's a lot of bad episodes in that first season. And I know you're going to talk with your other guest about the first couple episodes of The Next Generation coming up, and the episodes that you're probably planning on talking about are probably not the good ones.
Probably.
and then Deep Space Nine, right? Its first season, like I said, is pretty awful, pretty unwatchable. But I feel like Star Trek Voyager has a really strong first season, right? Outside of the original series, Star Trek Voyager has the best first season of any Star Trek show. And I feel like that first season is very strong. And I said this the last time I was on the podcast, and I think that's because Star Trek Voyager knew what it was right from the very beginning. Whereas The Next Generation had to figure itself out. What are we going to be? Are we just going to remake the original series episodes 100 years later? Or are we going to try and do something else? And then Deep Space Nine is, well, we're on a spaceship. We're not on a spaceship. We're on a space station, not a spaceship. And so people have to come to us. And so there's this different dynamic, and it had to figure itself out. But Voyager knew what it was right from the very beginning. It knew that we were essentially going to be, this bad guy of the week or plot device of the week, and we're not going to create these serialized stories, and we're going to travel along this path. And it knew what it was, and I think its season one really benefits from that. more so than any other show previous.
Right, and to your point, with what you're saying with Next Gen, like, are we just gonna recycle and do this stuff? Like, they had this issue of, like, well, what do we do? Like, this isn't Kirk's Enterprise anymore. It's an Enterprise, but are we gonna be like Kirk? Are we gonna be different from Kirk? How different are we gonna be from Kirk? And then same thing, like with Deep Space Nine. Like, well, Next Generation's like wildly successful. How are we ever going to compete with them? And yeah, right. Like there was this tension of trying to figure out who are we, and you can see that struggle. Like I was saying, the first 2 to 2.5 seasons of these shows. I think I mentioned it either with you or with someone else that I feel like that Deep Space Nine really took off at around the middle mark of season 3.
And I don't think you have to wait that long.
For me, that was just my experience. But generally speaking, the first, like we were saying, like the first 2-ish seasons are tough because they're finding their footing. But yes, to your point, Voyager does a good enough job in determining who they are as a show to not have to worry about the growing pains as much as the past series had.
And I think it also benefits from the fact that you have 7 seasons of The Next Generation and 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine where you've been able to write Star Trek for 9 seasons, and you've had, like, Rick Berman, he's got a firm grasp on what he wants to do with Star Trek, and all of these writers that have been on these shows, you have a good knowledge of the universe, and you've been writing Star Trek for a long enough period of time where you don't have as many growing pains right away.
Right, and Rick Berman himself, I mean, he worked very intimately with Gene Roddenberry in lore crafting and understanding the lore and the world of the 24th century that they were writing for. So, 10-ish years of writing it and knowing what the creator wanted even after the creator died is a testament to the world that they continued to build, years after Gene Roddenberry passed away.
Yeah, I definitely think Rick Berman knew what he was doing and what he wanted to do, and he had lots of time when he got to Voyager.
Absolutely. So that's, we've talked about the first 2 seasons ish, kind of, in a cursory kind of way, and there are a lot of really good moments, even in I know we were just talking about season 1, but season 2, season 3, and so on and so forth. And one thing to watch, and again, I'm jumping right now. I'm going through a transwarp, corridor right now, conduit type of thing right now. Is the EMH Doctor. I loved what they did with the Doctor in Voyager. In the sense that not human, spoilers, not a human, he's a hologram, and he's the Doctor, so it's a total nod to all you Doctor Who fans out there, just being called the Doctor. So, Robert Picardo, some of you might know him. There's a lot of stuff that he's been on, but for other sci-fi shows that you might be aware of, he played Woolsey on Stargate SG-1.
The entire Stargate universe, because then he went on Atlantis as well.
Yes, which I was about to get to. Yeah, he later went to Atlantis, and he led the show for about a season, I believe.
The 5th and final season, he was in charge of Atlantis.
Yeah. After Amanda Tapping's Colonel Carter left, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, a lot of great moments, and there are a few moments I'm going to want to highlight before we end this particular episode. But apart from that, season 3 onward, we get even more development with the crew and the characters. Some leave, some come back. So I'm happy to continue trucking right along, talking about these seasons as much as you want to.
Oh yeah, the Doctor is, objectively speaking, the Doctor is the best character on the show. I mean, I know other people can have their favorites, but I feel like if you want to be really objective, you're going to come back to the Doctor being the best character on the show. And I think that stems from, first, Robert Picardo is a fantastic actor. But I feel like the growth that you see in this Doctor character from the pilot episode where they activate him and he's like this super arrogant, no bedside manner at all, to really becoming like, doesn't even matter that he's a hologram by the end of the show.
Right.
And to just track that growth over the entire course of Voyager is just fantastic.
Yeah. And, especially later on in the show when he gets this new piece of technology, the mobile emitter, I really feel like that was like just an opportunity, or that just created exponential growth for him for obvious reasons. I mean, you're a hologram, you can only stay where there's, holographic, emitters and a holodeck type of thing. But I loved the addition of the mobile emitter and what room that gave Robert Picardo as an actor to do with his character. Oh
yeah. They introduced that mobile emitter halfway through season 3.
Yes.
There's that episode, Future's End, where they go back in time. They go back in time to get the mobile emitter, which is future technology.
Right. Which Future's End is actually one story that I could watch a gazillion and a half times. I love that episode of Voyager. That particular story of Voyager.
That 2-part episode, yeah. It's pretty good, yeah. Guest spot by Sarah Silverman.
Before she was big, really. I mean, like, early on in her career.
Yep. Yeah, but adding that mobile emitter really allowed the Doctor to become an actual member of the crew. Right? And it really allowed the storylines involving him to take off. It definitely did. Yes. And I think that was a very smart decision. I think it was interesting in the beginning where you have this Doctor who is confined to essentially the sick bay and then the holodeck, and that's an interesting idea in the beginning of the show, but it had to move past that, right? You had to allow him room to grow,
right? Even as a hologram, you had to allow him room to grow,
right? Correct. And there are so many good Doctor-centric episodes. There's that episode where the Doctor creates a family on the holodeck, and where he's off duty, he transfers himself to the holodeck, and he has like a wife and 2 kids, and it's really like he programs it. It's like super idyllic and like Leave It to Beaver style, where everything always goes well, and he invites B'Elanna and Kes to come with him, and they're like, that is not real, and they reprogram it to like be more realistic. And you get to see how like he really interacts. There's a touching moment at the end where his daughter dies in that episode, right? It's a really touching moment. It gives Robert Picardo a chance to shine as this Doctor, like growing these emotions. Really fantastic Doctor-centric episode.
Yeah. And there's Jen is gonna kill me for not remembering this, so you better save me, Eric. There's an episode where the time is moving different for a planet, and they beam the Doctor down with the mobile emitter, of course, to basically observe. And like I think it's like 10 seconds is like 100 years or 1,000 years or something like that. And Voyager is watching the planet just evolve over the course of like a minute, basically. Is any of this jumping out at you?
No, I knew exactly what episode you were talking about right when you said it. It's called Blink of an Eye.
There we go.
I was looking up what season it was in. It's in season 6. I wasn't sure if it was in season 5 or season 6, but yeah, Blink of an Eye. It's actually, if you go to IMDb, that's the highest rated episode of the entire show.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So knowing that it's the highest rated, what do you think it is about that particular episode that gave room for it to be the highest rated episode?
Well, I feel like that episode has almost everything that epitomizes Star Trek to me.
Okay.
Right? It has exploration, science, technology. There's diplomacy thrown in at the end, or even not just at the end, throughout the whole thing, where you see like the people on the planet, they're trying to send a letter to the sky ship, right? And the one regional leader says, "I demand that you leave us alone and stop these problems." And his scribe is like, "You demand? Like, are you sure that's the right word you want to use?" So there's like diplomacy thrown in there. And then at the end where the planet has like evolved past Voyager, right? They've gone far enough into the future because time is traveling fast enough for them, where they're just like, hey, we're just going to blow this thing up and shoot it out of the sky. But they managed to, right, that planet managed to send this emissary, who's Daniel Day Kim, is the guest actor who plays that emissary. You'll know Daniel Day Kim from Lost and Hawaii Five-0. Right? He's the emissary that they send. Absolutely. And he's like, and he goes back and tells his people, like, don't blow this ship out of the sky. They don't mean this. They're stuck here. And I just think that's just a good episode. Like, it's just got a good premise, and it's got everything that you can want from Star Trek. Science, technology, exploration, diplomacy. Mm-hmm. It's just a good episode.
So that's one that stands out to me, even though I can't remember the episode. So I'm going to lean on you remembering episode names, because anyway.
That one's called Blink of an Eye.
Which, yeah, I got that. And just anything where the Doctor is dreaming, specifically the ECH episodes.
Yeah. Okay, that episode that you're thinking of, it's called Tinker Tailor
Doctor Spy. Yeah,
like a play on the John le Carré novel.
Yes.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
I remember watching that episode. So it was at the apartment that I lived in, not too far from your old house, there in Grand Blanc, Michigan. And I was watching it on my old desktop computer, and it was like close to midnight, maybe 1 a.m. It was like a Friday, so it was the weekend basically. And I remember just losing it. I friggin' lost it whenever I saw him say, or it was basically said, like, activate the emergency command hologram, and then like his uniform
like
changes.
The pips fly on his.
Yeah, I was like losing it. I was like, oh my god, this is so friggin' cool. And I was just like totally nerding out and fanboying and everything, and I loved it. And then like it just like changes, and it's like, oh man. Really?
Yeah, and then it's a dream. Yeah, and then at one point they have to, like, there's that alien race that's spying on the Voyager, and they think that the Doctor's dreams are real.
Right. And Janeway.
And so then they have to pretend that the emergency command hologram is real.
Right, and Janeway actually gives the command to allow programming to take place, to allow for, this sort of thing to happen, to where that he could take command of Voyager if necessary. And we later find out that can become a reality later on.
Yeah, that's a funny episode, definitely. And he's like, activate the photonic cannon. And the alien is like, we're not showing any weapon systems activated. No, it's a funny episode.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, the Doctor was a character that I didn't care too much for at the beginning, but he definitely grew on me, for sure. And I think of the characters that... I think Chakotay ended up being, like, next to the Doctor, of course, Chakotay ended up being, I think, one of my more favorite characters of the show.
See, I feel like I liked Chakotay early on. I mean, I said that earlier here in this podcast, that I feel like they really used him and he was a strong character early on, right? Where he was standing up to Janeway and wanted the crew to be integrated. And then the Seska storyline is essentially the Chakotay storyline as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like after that, he really is underutilized. I almost feel like they didn't know what to do with him. And whenever they decided to do with him, it was always just your stereotypical Indian Vision quest.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was just like, you've got this character, but you just don't know what to do.
There was an episode, and I might be getting characters mixed up, but I'm like 98.5% sure that it was a Chakotay-centric episode where there was these like warring factions on a planet, and Chakotay got kind of engulfed in it. I'm pretty sure it was Chakotay, and come to find out, it was all just one big farce.
Right, it was a simulation.
Yeah.
The episode is called Nemesis.
Yep.
Right, it's in season 4, early on in season 4.
And that was one of my more favorite Chakotay episodes for whatever reason. I enjoyed the psychological aspect of what they were doing with the character, and just the perspective in general as it comes to like war and conflict, and you know, seeing two sides of the same coin, so to speak.
No, it's definitely a good philosophical statement, which I think is another thing that Star Trek does very well, is it presents these philosophical dilemmas. And Chakotay has a really great line at the end of that episode where, like, the whole entire episode he's basically being brainwashed to fight for one side in this war and hate the other side. But then at the end, you learn that really, like, the opposite is true of everything he's known the whole time. The aliens that he's been brainwashed to hate are supposedly the good guys. I put good guys in air quotes again.
Right. And
at the end of the show, he says to one of them, it's a lot harder to learn to hate than it is to learn to be accepting, or something like that. I'm mistaking the quote, but he says something to that effect right at the very end of the episode, and I think that's a really interesting philosophical situation that Star Trek can pose, and I think that's what it does very well.
Right, it can flip the script just like that, basically, when it comes to like trying to get you to think about an issue or some kind of premise that you really should be thinking about more deeply rather than surface level, of course. And good sci-fi does that, in my opinion.
That's I think that's the purpose of science fiction, is to pose ideas like that.
Yeah. So we got to talk about a character, okay? And this might frustrate some people, but we got to talk about this. Ensign Harry Kim. Forever Ensign Harry Kim. What's up with that, man? I mean...
Well, do you know what the very first scene that Harry Kim is in? Do you remember the very first scene in the entire show that we see Harry Kim? Do you remember what happens?
I can't, for the life of me, no.
So, Voyager, when they set out on their mission, they leave from Deep Space Nine.
Oh, that's right. He's talking with Quark.
He's talking with Quark.
Yeah, he's talking with Quark, yeah.
Quark is trying to swindle him, right?
Right.
He's trying to run his game and swindle him. And he's like, and Harry Kim's like, they warned us about the Ferengi at the Academy. And Quark is like, oh, what do you mean they warned you about the Ferengi? Like, and then Tom Paris comes in to save Harry Kim. And it's like, wait, didn't they warn you about the Ferengi at the Academy? Yeah. I just think it's like a really like cool moment, like, and it shows like the true naivety of this character, right at the very beginning, and you know, that's Harry Kim. He was always the naive guy, but he was always the optimist as well, right? Every time there was a chance to get home, he was so optimistic, and I feel like the show needed that character, that optimistic person there.
I think the thing that I didn't have much of an issue with with Harry, it's the fact that pretty much everyone, and I say everyone very loosely, around him would get promoted. I mean, Paris was reactivated with his old rank, and then he was demoted, and then promoted again. Tuvok got a promotion. There were other people, I'm pretty sure, that got promotions. And Harry, for 7 years, really for 70 years, but then shortened to 7 years, didn't get promoted.
Yeah, and there's even the show even mentions that. There's an episode in season 7, it's called Nightingale, where Harry Kim goes on, and it's the first mission that he's ever led by himself. Like, how is it season 7 that one of your senior officers has never led a mission? But he's like, don't send Chakotay along, don't send Tom Paris along, don't send anybody along, because if they're along, they'll be in charge of the mission, and I want this to be my mission. And he even says to Janeway, if we were in the Alpha Quadrant, I'd be a lieutenant by now, maybe even a lieutenant commander.
And to be fair, like, if you think about, like, real life ranks, I mean, I know your brother served our nation as an officer in the Army, and you know, regardless of what branch you're in, when you're an officer, like right out of either the academy or an ROTC program or an OCS program, you can expect to be an O3 pretty much within 4 years.
Yeah, it's you're not going to be an ensign for that long.
No, you're going to go from being an ensign or a second lieutenant to being a lieutenant junior grade or a first lieutenant within 2 years of initial commissioning, and then another promotion 2 years after that. Now, once you're at that O3, once you're a lieutenant, which would be in the Navy, which is what Star Trek adopts as the naval ranks, the naval officer ranks, you're looking at going from lieutenant to lieutenant commander maybe in like another 5 years. So like the ranks are going to space out from
go back to the Next Generation, and we'll talk about the Next Generation. In season 1, Geordi is a Lieutenant JG. He's got one solid, one black pip.
Yep.
Season 2, Geordi is Lieutenant full grade, 2 solid pips. Mm-hmm. Then in season 3, Geordi's a Lieutenant Commander.
Right.
So Geordi got promoted twice in a year, or 2 years, right? And then Worf, right, is a Lieutenant JG when the show starts.
Right.
I forget exactly when Worf becomes full grade lieutenant. It might be season 3. It might be season 4. I'm not exactly sure.
See, I thought Worf went from a Lieutenant JG in season 1 to becoming a lieutenant in season 2 when he became the security chief following Tasha, and then it wasn't until Generations that he becomes the lieutenant commander.
Well, I know it's Generations where he becomes a lieutenant commander. That's like the opening scene of the Next Generation crew. Not the opening scene of the movie. It's the opening scene of the Next Generation crew where they're doing the promotion ceremony on the holodeck on the old naval vessel. Great scene, by the way.
Loved it.
Yeah, but I think it might be until season 3 that Worf becomes a full grade lieutenant. But I don't think it's right when he becomes the security chief. I'll have to go back and look at this.
Yeah, we'll have to double check that. But regardless, everyone in every other show is getting promoted faster than Harry Kim.
There's even that episode of The Next Generation called Lower Decks. Do you remember this episode of The Next Generation, Lower Decks?
I do.
It follows the junior officers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that one, like, really bad junior officer that, like, this guy's like, Riker hates me. He just hates me. And then, but he still gets promoted from ensign to Lieutenant JG in that episode.
Right.
Right. Well, he thinks he gets promoted only because the one other person, you know, ended up dying in that mission. I know, spoilers. I'm sorry, but these are what said.
Eric, you're
25
spoiling.
years. 25
you're
years.
Spoiling Star Trek, dude.
I know. 25 years. Like, it'd be one thing if I came on here and talked about, like, season 2 of Discovery, I feel like the statute of limitations on spoilers is still in effect.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, why not?
But yeah, Harry Kim never gets promoted.
No.
Well, and I think the reason why, I mean, there's no in-show reason for him not to be promoted, but I think the real reason is the producers didn't like Garrett Wang, the actor.
Interesting.
Because I'm fairly certain this is the story, that when Kes leaves the show in season 4, the original plan was to have Harry Kim leave the show. Somehow. There's going to be some kind of storyline. But Garrett Wang, the actor, was named one of the most beautiful or sexiest people by one of those magazines.
Right.
That does something like that. And the show producers felt like they couldn't fire the actor at that point, after he had just been named one of the most beautiful or sexiest people, whatever the hell the title was.
Yeah, there was a panel that I found it on YouTube. I remember the story that you're talking about. Yeah, there was like trying to figure out like what to do, like with the Kes thing, and kind of like reviving and breathing some new life into the show. And that's kind of how like Jerry Ryan kind of came about, which created its own set of problems like on set with between her and Kate Mulgrew. But yeah, like I remember that panel when he was talking about that, and also like some of the strife that was going on between, like I said, Jerry Ryan and Kate Mulgrew, starting with season 4 onward of Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah, and that's the behind the scenes reason. Like I said, there is no in-show reason for him not to have been promoted. Because like you said, Tom Paris was Lieutenant JG, got demoted, and then re-promoted.
Right.
Tuvok got promoted from lieutenant to lieutenant commander, and I'm sure there were probably others that happened along the way as well.
Right. And I remember reading this. I don't know if you noticed this or if you were aware of it, but there was a point in the show where they more or less dropped the formality of saying lieutenant or commander so-and-so or ensign so-and-so, and they just started saying each other's first names, but the only person that the formality was in line for was the captain. So were you aware of that little tidbit?
No, I guess I never noticed that.
Yeah,
it makes sense. It makes sense that if you're on this ship, in this particular situation, some sense of formality would be dropped.
Right. So, yeah, that's something I'm gonna have to like double check myself, and that's gonna require an entire rewatch of Voyager to kind of prove that. But hey, whatever, why not?
Hey, I don't have a problem rewatching the whole thing.
Me either. I love Star Trek. I
love Star Trek too. Kind of obvious, right?
Kind of obvious. We're kind of doing a Star Trek podcast, guys. I don't know if y'all knew that. Anyway.
So you just mentioned Jerry Ryan.
I did.
I feel like we've put this off long enough.
Okay, let's bring it on.
I feel like we've got to get to the Borg, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, just like you can't talk about Voyager without talking about the Kazon, you definitely can't talk about Voyager without talking about the Borg.
Right. All right, so there's an episode, or it's a 2-part episode called Scorpion, that we start to really take a deep dive. We really do take a deep dive into the Borg as a species, and that's where Jerry Ryan, character 7 of 9 of Unimatrix 01, if I'm not mistaken, comes from. Just call her 7 for short. And Annika Hansen is her human name, related to an Admiral Hansen, if I'm not mistaken. And anyways, Jerry Ryan's character was brought on board because Kes was leaving, or the character of Kes was leaving the ship, and they also kind of wanted to breathe new life into it, and they kind of had this whole sex appeal thing that was going on that Kate Mulgrew was very much against, because she wanted there to be like just more respect of women in general. It's kind of painting with broad strokes with that in terms of like her feelings, and this was like the complete antithesis of it with Jerry Ryan coming on board, and that's the very short version. So with that, we had the Borg introduced in The Next Generation. They became the true main baddies for that show, and then of course we saw them again in 1996 First Contact, again the big baddie there. So now we're in their home territory of the Delta Quadrant, so of course we're going to run into them. And with that, I want to hear some of your perspectives, some of your likes, dislikes, and whatever else you want to talk about when it comes to the Borg, Eric.
Okay, so the Borg get introduced here in Voyager. It's the end of Season 3, beginning of Season 4, which is the exact same point in time that the Best of Both Worlds happens.
Correct.
Right, and that's totally on purpose. And I absolutely agree with the point that they wanted to sex appeal the show up. I don't think anybody can question that or deny that that's what they were trying to do. Right? It's very obvious. I mean, Jerry Ryan is a very beautiful woman, and they highlighted her assets.
Yes, quite literally.
Yeah. Yes, they highlighted them. And it created a lot of tension on set between her and Kate Mulgrew. And if I'm Kate Mulgrew, I have every reason to be upset, because once 7 of 9 comes on board, the show, she becomes the main character. And almost all of the story revolves around her. And so, if you're Kate Mulgrew, your show was stolen away from you for the lowest common denominator. And that did create a lot of tension. That's been reported by many different cast members. You mentioned Garrett Wang was talking about that. I remember hearing Robert Beltran talk about that as well. Like, that created a lot of tension on the set between the two of them.
And to be fair to that too, and I don't think you disagree with this, Eric. I mean, you've written for the same characters for 3-4 years up to this point, and you get an opportunity to create brand new stuff. The sky's the limit for this brand new character. It only makes sense that there would be more focus on her, because like it's revitalizing, just the cast in general.
I agree that you've got this new character and you want to write new story for her, and that can breathe new life into the show, but everything doesn't have to be about her. Agreed.
I mean, the captain, is the person playing the captain is the one that needs to get the meatiest stuff a good chunk of the time. Not all the time, because it's an ensemble cast, but there needs to be a good chunk of good stuff thrown to the captain and focus on the captain more than just the rest of the bridge officers and principal cast, of course.
Mm-hmm. That's true. For the most part, I would agree that you've got an ensemble show, so you don't have to have every storyline revolve around the captain, but the captain should be where your main focus is.
Right.
Except if you're Discovery and your main character is not your captain. Okay, but that's neither here nor there.
Or is it?
It's not. That's not the point that I'm trying to make here. So that's Jerry Ryan. But let's talk about the Borg. So this episode, Scorpion, if you were to ask the casual Star Trek fan, somebody who's probably not listening to this podcast, or maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but the casual, what's the best episode of Star Trek Voyager? And I would say 75% of the people are going to say Scorpion. Or maybe not 75%, but it's going to be the most popular answer for what's the best episode of Star Trek Voyager. They're going to say this episode, Scorpion. Would you agree with that?
Maybe. I might say either like a Timeless. I might even
Timeless is the best. Timeless is the correct answer.
I would say that or Endgame, but Timeless is up there for me.
Endgame is not even one of the 50 best episodes. We'll get to that.
But timeless. But anyways, like we can agree on timeless.
We can agree on timeless, but we'll also agree that Scorpion will be very high on the list of most people's best episodes.
Sure.
Right, and I'm not saying it's not a good episode, because it is. I mean, I think it is a very good episode. It's the first time we ever see more than one Borg cube on screen at a time. Because in every episode that we saw up until that point, right, Q-Who, Best of Both Worlds, and in the movie First Contact, it was only one Borg cube.
Right, and then we saw the sphere inside the cube.
Yeah, but then you go to Scorpion here, and you see more than one Borg cube on the screen at the same time. And the teaser for this episode is very short. It's the Borg cube coming up and saying, "We're the Borg, resistance is futile, you'll be assimilated," and then boom, the ship being shot at and blown up. And you're like, whoa. Who the hell can blow up a Borg ship? Who the hell can blow up a Borg ship? And so it creates this really interesting story of, like, well, the Borg are supposed to be the most powerful people out there, and if somebody can just blow up a Borg ship like this,
right,
we're in trouble. Either this is an ally or we're in trouble.
Right.
And it's a very interesting episode, and I know people like to criticize it for, like, oh, Janeway, she gave weapons of mass destruction to the Borg, but she wouldn't give transporters or replicators to the Kazon. What gives? And I think that's very oversimplifying what's actually happening in this episode.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Giving the Borg, nanoprobe technology is not going to seriously alter the balance of power, but giving the Kazon replicators and transporters could alter the balance of power, because those races are so technologically far behind.
Right, and you got to think that even the Borg, they were using nanoprobes. I mean, that's part of how they do what they do. So it's not like it really would have advanced much to what, just agreeing with what you're saying in terms of, like, the balance of stuff and, like, what's going on in the moment for these events, these entanglements that they become a part of in these different episodes and these different storylines.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So you're saying that Scorpion is probably the most popular because Jerry Ryan. I'm gonna go out.
Well, she doesn't even show up until part 2.
The very end.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Yeah. She's in part 2. She's not in part 1.
But it's more popular by virtue of it's the Borg, and we're finally seeing the Borg again. We haven't seen him in a minute.
Mm-hmm. Well, that episode premiered in what, 97?
97 or 8, yeah. I mean, that's end of season 3.
End of season 3. So I'm just trying to think, where is that in relation? Okay, yeah. So May of 97, and First Contact came out in
December of 96.
So we're 6 months later?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and the Borg have always been the most popular Star Trek baddie.
Right, and without just kind of coming out of Voyager for a second, that's one thing that I'm a little nervous about when it comes to Picard, knowing that we're right at a month, pretty much, away from it premiering, and knowing that the Borg are going to be a central part of the story, even though we haven't, apart from like a little one-off kind of thing in Star Trek Enterprise, which is for a different episode altogether, we haven't really seen much of the Borg since First Contact, since like Scorpion and Endgame and just the Voyager era in general. And we've seen them in the comics, they show up in Star Trek Online, and I just worry that if we keep coming back to them, we're going to overuse them and we're going to kind of wear out their welcome, which I think Voyager really started to do the farther along it went once Jerry Ryan's character was introduced and the Borg were introduced into Star Trek Voyager.
And I would agree with that. And I think that becomes Voyager's fatal flaw to me.
Is the overuse of the Borg?
Overuse of the Borg. Absolutely.
Okay.
Right? It becomes, when we first are introduced to the Borg in Q Who,
Yeah.
Picard has to plead with Q. Like, Picard is literally begging Q to save them from the Borg. And you are, like, terrified. And then we get into the Best of Both Worlds, and they assimilate Picard, and they basically destroy the entire fleet, and almost everything is destroyed. And it's like, wow, these guys are like super bad, and we're just defeating them basically by luck, right? And in First Contact, it's again one cube, and they almost, change Earth's entire history. And then when you start to have the Borg show up more and more, you have to defeat them. You can't lose to them all the time. But the more times you defeat them, it's like the law of diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
That you keep defeating them, and you're not afraid of them anymore. I remember you told a story, and you said you went to Star Trek: The Experience in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And they had like a Borg part of it where you could like walk through there, and you knew it was just guys in costumes, but you said you were terrified and you felt like you were going to be assimilated.
Yeah, true story.
Yeah, and I feel like the more you have the Borg show up, and I feel like you should be terrified of the Borg. That's the point of the Borg.
Yeah.
But the more you have them show up, and the more you defeat them, the less scary they become. And I feel like that's a fatal flaw that Voyager has.
And that's the thing when it came to Species 8472, that I feel like they kind of took the terror that the Borg originally had when it came to, just Starfleet and just whatever crew that would be interacting with the Borg. I feel like that was the terror that was originally with the Borg got transferred to that new species 8472 that we were introduced to as like the main baddie, the main enemy of the Borg.
Yeah, but then very, very shortly after that, we make peace with Species 8472. There's that episode where they create that fake Starfleet Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then at the end of the episode...
I enjoyed that episode, too.
No, I enjoyed that episode. It's called In the Flesh from Season 5. But they make peace with Species 8472 at the end of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that terror, that big bad guy is like gone at that point, and it gets put back onto the Borg.
Yeah. And the thing, I guess the thing that kind of didn't make much sense, and I'm definitely jumping the timeline, Eric, but like, in First Contact, we're introduced to the idea of the Borg Queen, and then much later on in Voyager, we come in contact with the Borg Queen again, and I'm so confused by that. Like, are we dealing with some like wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff? Like, why are we getting Alice Kriega or Krieg, or how you pronounce her last name, over and over again if she was already destroyed?
Well, but it's Alice Krieg. I pronounce it Krieg, but also the actress changes there at one point to a different actress.
I think they bounce between two different ones. Yeah.
Susanna Thompson, I believe, is the other actress's name. But I feel like, First Contact, that Borg Queen is in the past, so you could like get a new Borg Queen. But the Borg Queen is really an anachronism. It really doesn't make sense if you think about it. And I'm sure you know this because, you love First Contact, but they weren't originally going to have a Borg Queen.
Correct.
Right? Ronald D. Moore, like I mentioned his name earlier in this, created the Borg Queen basically out of necessity, because you couldn't have the characters just interact with like the collective conscious voice. They needed an actual person to interact with out of necessity.
Yeah.
And so she really doesn't make sense when you think about it.
But I mean, it's still a fun concept. I mean, just it. Yeah, but apart from that, like, you're talking about law of diminishing returns and the fact that one of the weaknesses of Voyager, despite it being a very enjoyable show, I know not everyone loves Voyager, and that's totally fine, but for it being an enjoyable show and what it is, once they started doing more and explaining more about the Borg and bringing them back and, hitting them where it hurts time and time again, it really weakened the character species of the Borg. And I didn't need to know about, like, these other characters. I mean, I know that I was tweeting the actor that plays Icheb, and I did enjoy some of that, but, like, the more you explain the lore of like a big baddie, the less terrifying they become. Like, I don't know.
I actually like the Icheb storyline. The whole
I did too.
Where they encounter the Borg children, right? Mm-hmm. That can't fully assimilate everything, and then when we get the follow up with Icheb's family, I think that's a fantastic episode, right? But I think I understand what you're saying, that sometimes having the bad guy just be, like, unknown makes them a bigger bad guy.
Right. I mean, like, let's just jump fandom for just a second, okay, without me spoiling anything. So, like, you look at the sequel trilogy of Star Wars with Snoke. You're wondering who the devil is Snoke, and, like, there's this mystery about him, and, like, what is he going to do? And you kind of think you know who he is by the time Last Jedi comes around, maybe, and yet you still don't. But, like, part of what made Snoke so terrifying is in my opinion at least, is you didn't know who he was. And I know that's a totally different fandom, but just for the sake of the example and kind of what I'm getting at, that's the first thing that comes to mind, is just I wish there was more of I wish there was still a mystery, more of a mystery with the Borg, kind of like there was with 8472 in Voyager. Just my 2 cents.
I agree with that. I think you can say the same thing if you jump fandoms again and go to Game of Thrones. Sure. You have the Night King. He's a terrifying character when we first see him, and then by the end, okay, I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't seen Game of Thrones, I don't find him very terrifying at the end. But when we were first introduced to him, he was, because there was this presence and this mystery around him.
Yeah, and the others, or the Watchers, whatever you want to call them, depending on if you're reading the book or whatever. I mean, they are terrifying, and when you start to explain something about, like, your enemy, it doesn't have the same punch to it as it used to.
Yeah, and when you constantly defeat them, it also doesn't have the same punch.
Right.
I mean, the episode Unimatrix Zero, which I don't care for that episode. I know it's a very popular episode. It's pretty highly rated. But Janeway is able to outsmart the Borg Queen fairly easily in that episode. Same thing with the episode Endgame, which we could spend 2 hours of me tearing apart and ripping apart that episode, because I absolutely hate that episode Endgame. Like I said, I know that's a very popular episode, but Janeway, future Janeway, and you could say, well, she's from the future, which is why she can do this, but no, she makes the Borg Queen look like a fool. And I don't want the Borg to be made fools of, because at that point I'm no longer afraid of them, and I feel like we should be afraid of the Borg.
Yeah, the Borg is a species, both as a species and just, I guess, as a character in general. They seem to be the ones that should be 2 steps ahead of what you're going to do.
I feel like they are, like, until we get to later Voyager.
Yeah. So for anyone that loves the Borg,
I don't hate all of the Voyager Borg storylines. Like, there's that episode Dark Frontier, which is explores Seven of Nine's past. It's like it flashes back to her parents tracking the Borg, and I think that's a really good episode.
sure.
And like I said, the Egypt storyline, I think that's a good episode. So there is some stuff there dealing with the Borg that I actually do like, and I like the episode Scorpion. It's just when you keep doing them, like those two episodes, Unimatrix Zero and Endgame, I'm not a fan of either one of those episodes.
Gotcha. Okay. So, you know, we've talked a lot about like the seasons and like the enemies. We've talked about some of the principal cast, and we've mainly focused on like some favorite moments of the Doctor, by and large. There have been some other big name folks that have been on Voyager that, you know, listeners may or may not be aware of. Two that come to mind immediately, and you might know others, Eric. John Rhys Davies, who plays Leonardo da Vinci in the holodeck episodes with Catherine Janeway towards the end, middle to end of the series. And then, of course, there was a pre-famous, or kind of a pre-famous Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, when he was still known as The Rock, in an episode called Sukanse, if I'm pronouncing it right. And he was just called the champion. The champion, I think it was just his character name, that Jerry Ryan's 7 of 9 had to wrestle and fight against.
Yeah, well, at that point, you know, Voyager was on UPN, and UPN was the host of WWE SmackDown. So that's why The Rock, he was like the champion of WWE at the time. Or he might not have been the champion, but he was one of the most popular performers out there in WWE, and they were on the same network. So it was just like, it was a way of cross-promotion. Hey, let's throw The Rock on this episode.
Okay. See, I didn't watch WWE or WWF, whatever it was, at that point.
Yeah, and then Jonathan Rhys... What was Jonathan Rhys?
Davies.
I was going to say Myers, but that's a different actor. Jonathan Rhys Davies. You'll also know him. He was Gimli.
And Sala on Indiana Jones.
Yep, and he was also on Sliders. He was one of the main characters on Sliders.
Yes.
Right, and he shows up to play Leonardo da Vinci in 2 or 3 episodes.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. So
if I recall correctly, in that episode that I mentioned earlier, Nightingale, the main guest actor, I don't know his name, was one of the main characters on Firefly. He played the Shepherd Book on Firefly.
Oh, okay.
Right, I know Firefly is a very popular science fiction show out there.
Yes it is. Now, we've talked around some things. We've talked, like I said, we talked about the Kazon and the Borg as like probably the two main big bads of this series, and we've started talking a little bit about some famous or more famous type guest stars that have kind of been sprinkled in throughout. Now, I don't want to end this episode without making sure that we take the time to talk about Aaron Eisenberg, because I know that was something that was important to you. So I think now is a perfect time, or a semi-perfect time. I mean, we're past the Kazon, but we might as well just talk about him now, and the role that he played in Star Trek Voyager.
Okay, sure. Aaron Eisenberg, you know, we know him as Nog. I don't know what his medical condition was, but, you know, you look at him and you see him as being like a younger person. You think of him as being younger, right? Like, he and Jake Sisko were friends, and so you kind of think about them as being the same age. But Aaron Eisenberg was a lot older than the character of Nog.
He was 25, I think. 24, 25. Yeah.
Right. And it's because of his small stature.
Correct.
Right? And so he shows up in an episode in early season 2 of Voyager, playing a young Kazon. Again, he's playing like a younger character. And the Kazon, take them or leave them, love them or hate them. I don't hate them, I don't love them. They were patterned after LA street gangs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was what Michael Pillar has come out and said. That's what he patterned the Kazon after, was these LA street gangs, where they were all the same species, but they didn't get along, and they each controlled their own territory, and they had like initiation rituals, right, for young people that were joining these sects and these cells, just like gangs have initiations. And so Aaron Eisenberg plays a young Kazon who is sent on an initiation, right? And his initiation is to, like, basically kill an enemy. I don't know if it's necessarily to kill him. I think it is. But so he goes out, and Chakotay is off on his standard vision quest, which is like the only thing that the writers could think of for Chakotay to do. Chakotay's off on a shuttle by himself, and Aaron Eisenberg's young Kazon character attacks Chakotay's shuttle, and they both end up crash landing on this planet, this barren planet. Right? And they're on this barren planet together, and Chakotay has no malice whatsoever for Aaron Eisenberg's character. I cannot. There's no way I know what that character's name is. But this whole time he's trying to, like, you're my prisoner and I'm gonna take you back or I'm gonna kill you, and eventually, like, Chakotay manages to soften him up.
Yeah.
And they end up working together. Very much like a Next Generation episode where Geordi and a Romulan are trapped on a planet together and they have to learn to work together.
It's a great episode too.
Oh, that's a great episode. Yeah, called The Enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's a similar premise to that episode.
And you weren't too sure about what Aaron's condition was. So Aaron was born with a partially functioning kidney. So at the age of 17, he got a kidney transplant. So ultimately, it was stuff related to kidney complications.
Okay, and that stunted his growth.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the long and short of it when it comes to the health condition that was impacting him. Like, I remember thinking, wow, he's just probably 13, 14 years old because of how short he was and just everything like that. But then, looking at Wikipedia and Star Trek, and other places on the internet, learning about Aaron, like his Twitter and other socials and stuff like that, it's like, holy crap, he just died at 50. I mean, this Deep Space Nine came out in 93. Holy cow, like that was 26 years ago. Holy cow, this dude was like 23, 4, 5 when this show came out. And yet he's playing like a 12 or 13 year old, like you were saying, and just absolutely wild. But he did a fantastic job, of course, primarily on Deep Space Nine. I mean, that's where we primarily know him from. But of course, with this one guest role that he played as a member of the Kazon species in what you were describing. So I'm glad that we were able to make sure he was mentioned, especially for anyone that does end up watching Deep Space Nine. You'll have an awareness to look for him in an early season of Voyager, while the Kazon are still around and doing their thing with the Voyager crew
and terrorizing them and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's season 2, episode 2. It's called Initiations.
Mm-hmm. So, we've been talking a lot tonight about, like I said, Renee, as we opened the show with, and we've spent a good chunk of time talking about Voyager and the ups and downs and things like that. And last time that we were talking, I kind of asked you to speak generally about just Star Trek in general, I believe. And when it comes to Voyager, knowing that you were dedicated to watching the show as each episode came out, what are some maybe final thoughts or advice or whatever you want to call it as we kind of start to wrap the show up in terms of encouraging people to check out Voyager? You know, you talk about like picking up storylines, and there is a storyline that we do end up picking up from an entirely different series, and it's the episode "False Prophets," if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah.
Where there was an episode of Next Gen. I think it's like early season 3.
Like season 2 or season 3.
Where there's this alleged stable wormhole that folks are trying to bid on to see who's going to have rights for it and use of it and stuff like that. And the Ferengi get very upset that they weren't invited to it. And anyway, stuff happens, and these two Ferengi end up stuck and trapped in the Delta Quadrant. And we pick up on that in season 3, I believe, of Voyager. False Prophet, yeah. So we see that kind of come to a conclusion from something that was started a long time ago. So it was really cool to have like that thread tied up. I mean, especially if you're like the inquisitive type, and you're wondering like, well, what the devil is going to happen to them? Like they're cut off from like their species and all this stuff, and then you watch the episode and you see what kind of shenanigans have happened, and it's an entertaining, like just a popcorn chewing episode.
Oh yeah, and I like that about Voyager. It has those entertaining popcorn episodes.
Yeah.
Right, that you can play one of them and then go to bed, or I've got 45 minutes before I gotta go to work, and you can put on an episode, and you can like just watch the one, you can be satisfied. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like Deep Space Nine, I'm gonna want to watch more than one episode.
Sure. So we kind of talked about it, and I know that you said Timeless is the best episode of Voyager, potentially of all. Okay, so we're going to put Timeless to the side for just a second. Apart from Timeless, what's your favorite story? It can be a single episode or a 2-part episode besides Timeless. I know I just made that real hard for you.
No. I have an answer.
Okay.
And it's called Hope and Fear.
Okay.
It's the season 4 finale. Okay. This is another episode that has a great guest actor in it. It's got Ray Wise is the main guest actor.
Mm-hmm.
So Ray Wise, if you're familiar, he was on Twin Peaks. He played Laura Palmer's father, the murder victim on Twin Peaks. He's been in a lot of things since then. Ray Wise, very, very famous, very popular actor, very successful. He's the main guest star.
Okay.
And so this is another episode that picks up like these, does this follow-up that I've been talking about, where, you know, we have the episode Scorpion, where Janeway gives this Borg this technology to the Borg to help them defeat Species 8472. But what happens in the aftermath of that? Do the Borg become super powered, or are the Borg content? The Borg are never content, right? But what happens after this scene where now we've helped the Borg? It turns out the Borg went and used this technology to decimate a region of space that they had previously not been able to decimate, right? And so this Ray Wise, the actor, I've drawn a total blank on his character's name. Do you know what episode I'm talking about? Hope and Fear?
Vaguely, yeah.
Okay, so this is the episode where they've started to receive transmissions from Starfleet. They managed to tap into some communications array to receive transmissions from Starfleet, and they meet this character who, their species, they're like linguists, and they can like decipher any any type of language like almost instantly. And so he comes on board and he helps them try and recover some of this corrupted data file from Starfleet. And this data file leads them to this ship, with the quantum slipstream drive, which is going to allow Voyager to get back home in a month or something.
I remember this. Yeah, a couple of days, I think.
Yeah, like very short period of time. And then you learn that this whole thing is a ruse, and he is setting up Voyager to be taken back to the Borg and assimilated, because the Borg assimilated all of his race after Janeway had helped them, because the Borg were never able, his species was always able to fend off the Borg until Janeway gave him this technology to help them out. And so this is a really good follow-up, right? And you see, maybe everything we're doing is not, for the better, and there's maybe some negative impact to what's happening here. And I really just like that episode.
Sure. And I've already said my favorite episode, and that's Future's End, Part 1 and 2. I have specifically fired up my different streaming services and just watched that, when I'm having just a crappy day or a less than stellar day, just because it just, to me, represents good Star Trek from Voyager. So that's the main thing. Now, there are a lot more things about Voyager, not just Voyager, but the other shows that we could spend hours upon hours talking about. But I want to make sure that we have the time to do these other bits justice, instead of just doing a one-off type of thing with it and never coming back to it. We're going to plant the seed and we're going to come back to it in a later season. How about that? Like talking about the Delta Flyer, Bride of Chaotica, and the other like
We've
pulp
spent
stuff.
like 2.5 hours talking here, and we've mentioned Janeway like twice.
That wasn't intentional, I promise. What we're going to do is we are going to take deeper dives into the other characters, like especially the captains. Like we might even do like a captain showdown type of thing and come up with like scenarios and how, like, you know, Cisco and Janeway or you know, Janeway and Kirk might have handled a particular situation or whatever. But I want to. There's so much to all these shows that just one episode on it isn't going to do it justice. So we're definitely going to be talking, especially the folks listening to this, we're definitely going to be talking more about Janeway and the other captains. We're going to talk about some ship design stuff in the near future. I know that came up in one of our last conversations we had, Eric. And just famous battles in general. So we're definitely going to talk about implications of like the Battle of Wolf 359 and other incursions and things that have come up, both, you know, mainly in the shows and movies, but we might even talk about like books or comics or video games too, depending on how we feel about that. So with that, we're going to have to head out of operations, and we're going to have to like start making our way down to the habitat ring here in the near future. So I know I kind of already asked you this, but any final parting thoughts to the listeners as we kind of put a pin or try and put a bow on this first visit as it relates to Star Trek Voyager?
I think I've pretty much said like
Okay.
why I like Voyager. You know, that lost in space concept.
Yeah.
This is our crew, and this idea that it has so much watchability to
Yeah.
me, and I really enjoy that aspect of it.
Absolutely. And the thing I really, if you like music, I really enjoy the opening theme for Voyager. Even the closing theme isn't
The
too bad
opening
either.
theme is way better than Deep Space Nine's opening theme.
Yeah, you don't want to fall asleep with Voyager's opening theme. You don't want to have a little siesta. But yeah, like the music, I like the music in it, and like the music in between scenes is pretty much consistent with everything that you would experience from, you know, 1987 onward in terms of Star Trek television. So, anyways, we're gonna pick up with this much later on. So I want to thank my first officer, Lieutenant Commander Christofferson, for taking care of the station for us and for coming back and having a conversation. Next time that we pick up, you'll have been hearing this, and there'll be a new TRTV news that'll be dropping. And in the near future, we're going to be talking about the show Star Trek Enterprise. But we're also going to be hearing from Phil Seidel as he prepares to talk about the first few episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, if you haven't told a friend about this, please do. Share it. Just poke them. You know, bribe them if you need to. Just have them check it out. And there are multiple ways that you can get in contact with us. Remember to open hailing frequencies, and you can get in contact with us by entering in coordinates trtvpod@gmail.com. You can also send a voice-only transmission by entering in coordinates 817-752-4757. That's 817-752-4757. Remember, you have a 3-minute time limit, and your comments may be used on a future episode of These Are the Voyages. Now, if you want to send something to the station using some of our communication buoys that have been issued by Starfleet, you can also send it to the Lone Star Station by entering in coordinates P.O. Box 2455, Azle, Texas 76098. thank you guys for listening today and going on this journey with Eric and I as we talk about this live action series called Star Trek Voyager. There are many more voyages ahead of us, and we are so grateful to have each and every one of you on board with us, both in the group and on all the socials. If you want to connect with us on those socials, make sure you check us out at TRTV Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and our Facebook page. If you find our Facebook page, you found the group. Just like I said at the beginning, hit the button and it'll take you to the group. And apart from that, just supporting the show, you can do that by telling your friends and continuing to listen, to give us a thumbs up, a like, and a comment on iTunes, like with our podcast, on Spotify, on Stitcher, Google Play, and anywhere else you might listen to podcasts. You can also support us on Patreon. There's special content just for patrons, and there are different financial levels and different rewards that you can take advantage of. So that's at patreon.com/These Are The Voyagers. Again, thank you so much for listening today, and always may you boldly go and make it so.